The gratitude tithe was non-negotiable. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the Terran Mandate vessel Arbitrage. Before her, the void was a serene tapestry of distant, indifferent suns. One of those suns was Viridia's star, now occluded by the blunt, gilded geometry of a Cathar Dominion flagship. The Arbitrage was a vessel of law, not war, its purpose etched into every polished bulkhead and quiet data stream. Its mission was to untangle knots of injustice with the precise application of statutes and accords, a task that felt impossibly delicate against the brute certainty of the ship blocking their path. The stakes were an entire colony of 3 million souls slowly being bled dry by a legal fiction. Rostova's jaw was tight, a single point of tension, in a posture of otherwise perfect military stillness. She knew this confrontation would not be resolved by plasma fire, but in the cold, unforgiving arena of a public inquiry, a star court of galactic opinion. Her second-in-command, Kenji Tanaka, kept his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Their weapon ports remained cold. "Commander," he reported, his voice a low counterpoint to the bridge's ambient hum. "They are broadcasting their legal authority on all pan-system channels. They're quite proud of it." Rostova gave a curt nod. "Pride is a liability, Kenji. It makes an opponent predictable." She turned her gaze to the shimmering column of light near the command chair, where the ship's logic core magister manifested as a tranquil, slowly rotating lattice of silver and blue. "Magister, have you completed the preliminary analysis of the Cathar's tithe doctrine?" The AI's voice was pure synthesized resonance without warmth or inflection. "Affirmative, Commander. The doctrine is predicated on 87,000 precedents, all of Cathar origin. It is a closed logical loop. By their own laws, their claim is unassailable. They had built a cage of words and called it justice. We are not subject to their laws." Rostova stated, the words clipped. "We are subject to the intersystem accord. That is the ground we will fight on." She felt the familiar simmer of anger, an emotion she kept carefully banked like a fusion reactor's core. It was a fuel, not a fire. To win here, she needed to be colder than the vacuum outside. She needed to be a mirror, reflecting the Cathar's own methods back at them until they shattered under the weight of their own reflection. The path forward was treacherous, a corridor of legal blades where one misstep meant economic servitude for an entire world. The air on Viridia tasted of dust and desperation. In a small hydroponics bay on the outskirts of the capital, a young girl watched as 2 hulking gray-skinned Cathar collectors logged the week's harvest into their data slates. Her father stood beside her, his hands clenched into useless fists. "They take half of everything," the girl whispered, her voice trembling. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. The gesture meant to be reassuring, but failing entirely. "It is the gratitude tithe, little one," he said, the words tasting like ash. "For the peace they say they gave us. We pay for a history we never knew." The hail from the Cathar flagship, the Gilded Hand, was expected. A hollow screen flickered to life, revealing the face of Prelate Vorn. He was perched in a command throne of obscene opulence, his chitinous face a mask of serene condescension. Fine, silky filaments, the Cathar equivalent of hair, drifted around his narrow head. His eyes, multifaceted like a fly's, held a glittering, ancient arrogance. Commander Rostova Vorn began, his voice smooth and layered with false cordiality. "An unexpected pleasure. You have come to observe the orderly administration of our ancestral obligations." Rostova met his gaze without flinching. "Prelate Vorn, I have come to contest the legality of your administration under the statutes of the Intersystem Accord." Vorn's mouthparts twitched in what might have been a smile. "The Accord." a charming document for infant species. It governs interactions between equals. This is a matter of a debt being paid, a simple accounting. 3 million people are not an accounting error. Rostova countered, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. They are a sovereign population being subjected to resource seizure without due process. Your claim rests on a local doctrine of proximity benevolence, a concept unrecognized by any impartial galactic body. This was not a dispute. It was an invasion by ledger. Recognition is irrelevant. Vorn purred, spreading his six-fingered hands. Our benevolence is a fact of history. We cleansed this sector of vermin fleets 5 millennia ago. We made it safe for life to flourish. The colony on Viridia breathes air free of radioactive taint because of our ancestors' sacrifice. A tithe of gratitude is the smallest of prices. He leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes seeming to resolve Rostova into 1,000 tiny, insignificant images. Denying this debt is to deny causality itself, a profound philosophical error. Commander. The human moral line was a simple, bright thread. You do not punish children for the alleged debts of ancestors they never met. Magister's calculus was different, a web of probabilities and legal precedents. The Cathar's method was the antagonist, a suffocating framework of obligation. It was a triangle of conflict, and Rostova stood at the nexus, holding the line. Your history is not our obligation, Rostova said. Your claim is invalid. I am therefore formally requesting a public inquiry to be arbitrated by a neutral quorum under Accord Statute 7.4. All resource collection from Viridia must cease until a judgment is rendered. For the first time, a flicker of something other than amusement crossed Vorn's face. It was surprise quickly masked. He had expected a military challenge or angry posturing. He had not expected the quiet, unyielding mechanism of interstellar law to be invoked. He had built his power on the assumption that no one would bother to read the fine print. The law was a weapon, and she had just unsheathed it. A public inquiry. Vorn's voice regained its silken tone, but a sharp edge had entered it. A theatrical and unnecessary step. But the Cathar Dominion does not fear scrutiny. We welcome the opportunity to educate the galaxy on the nature of true justice. The request is granted. The screen went blank. Kenji let out a slow breath. He agreed. Just like that. Of course he did, Rostova replied, turning away from the screen. He believes his legal framework is a fortress. He doesn't see it as the weapon it will become in our hands. She looked toward the AI's shimmering form. Magister, you have the records of the 3 other species they've subjugated with this doctrine. The Pathali, the Gresh, and the Weavers of Oran. I want every data point, every economic downturn, every trade concession forced upon them. Cross-reference it with the Cathar's historical expansion. Show me the pattern. The analysis is already underway, Commander, the AI replied. The pattern is not one of justice. It is one of consumption. Iris Thorne. The ship's legal counsel stepped forward from his station. He was older than Rostova, his face a roadmap of countless quiet battles fought in sterile arbitration chambers. Commander Vorn's confidence is not just arrogance. Cathar law is notoriously dense, a self-referential labyrinth. They will try to drown the inquiry in procedural motions and historical minutiae. They will make truth impossible to find. Rostova nodded, her expression grim. That's why we won't be looking for truth in their history. We will be looking for the price. Everything has a cost, Aris, even their so-called benevolence. She paused, a thought solidifying in her mind, a core principle of her command and her vessel's very existence. The arbitrage teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. It was a creed that would be tested now as never before. She had initiated a gambit that could either free a world or legitimize its enslavement before the entire galaxy. Victory had to be forged from their own rules. The days leading up to the public inquiry were a blur of intense preparation. Rostova Thorn and Magister became a single entity, a three-part mind dedicated to dismantling the Cathar's legal architecture. They worked in the ship's legal archive, a silent circular room where walls of data scrolled in serene, endless waterfalls. Thorn, the cautious veteran, mapped out the expected Cathar arguments, preparing countermotions for every conceivable procedural trap. He was a master of the intricate dance of accord law, a world of clauses and subclauses where a single misplaced comma could mean ruin. "They will invoke the ancient works precedent," Thorn murmured, pointing to a highlighted section of Cathar legal code on a floating display. "It grants them special consideration for actions performed before the accord was ratified. They will argue their pacification of this sector is an ancient work exempt from modern scrutiny." Rostova watched the text scroll by. But the tithe isn't ancient. The collection is happening now. The harm is in the present tense. That's our anchor. Meanwhile, Magister worked on a scale no organic mind could comprehend. The AI sifted through the economic histories of the Pathali, the Gresh, and the Orani weavers. It built a timeline not of battles or treaties, but of falling stock prices of resource exports that suddenly became one-sided of technological development that mysteriously stalled. The data painted a chilling picture. First came the arrival of the Cathar offering stability. Then came the introduction of the gratitude tithe, framed as a small price for their protection. Within 3 generations, each of those species had become economic vassals, their sovereignty a memory. Their governments were puppets, their people indentured servants paying off an unpayable debt. They did not conquer worlds. They foreclosed on them. The methodology is consistent. Magister reported its synthesized voice echoing in the quiet archive. The initial tithe is always calculated at 1.7% of a species' gross systemic product. It is designed to be felt but not catastrophic. Over time, clauses for interest on arrears and gratitude reassessment are invoked. The percentage climbs. The economic decline accelerates exponentially. The Cathar do not need warships. Their balance sheets are their weapons. Rostova stared at the cascading graphs. The lines all went down, charting the slow, methodical strangulation of a people. They found a way to weaponize debt, to make a species pay for its own chains. Her anger was a cold, hard knot in her chest. This was the enemy she faced, not a fleet, but an equation that always solved for Cathar dominance. She had to find a new variable to introduce something their perfect predatory math hadn't accounted for. On Viridia, the pressure was mounting. A doctor in the colony's main hospital stared at her inventory screen. It blinked red, showing critical shortages of neural stabilizers and broad-spectrum antivirals. A Cathar auditor had been by that morning earmarking a shipment of medical supplies as part of the tithe. For the health of the Dominion, the creature had said its voice devoid of any emotion. Now she had to choose. The child in Ward 3 with synaptic fever, or the elder in Ward 7 with a collapsing respiratory system. Her choice was a direct consequence of a legal document drafted 5,000 years ago. She felt a profound, soul-crushing weariness. Justice felt very far away. The day of the public inquiry arrived. It was not held in a physical courtroom, but in a secured, neutral data space known as the Corridor of Law. It was a virtual chamber, vast and austere, its digital walls displaying the seals of the 100 species that formed the quorum. Each seal represented a witness, a judge in the court of galactic opinion. Rostova sat in her command chair, Thorn at her side. Magister's presence was a steady, silent hum in the ship's systems, its full processing power focused on the torrent of data that would soon be unleashed. Prelate Vorn appeared, his image projected opposite theirs. He looked even more confident than before, serene in his conviction. He was flanked by two other Cathar legal scholars, with cold, intelligent eyes. The inquiry was opened by a neutral arbiter, a crystalline entity from the Cygnus X1 compact. Its voice a series of harmonious chimes translated into comprehensible language. The formalities were observed, the charges and countercharges read into the permanent record. Then Vorn began his presentation. He did not speak of fleets or battles. He spoke of history, of cosmic responsibility. He wove a grand narrative of the Cathar as lonely gardeners in a hostile wilderness, patiently weeding out existential threats so that younger, more fragile flowers like humanity could one day bloom. His voice was hypnotic, his logic seductive. He presented star charts overlaid with ancient threat assessments, showing the sector swarming with now extinct stellar predators. He painted a masterpiece of self-serving history. We expended treasure beyond imagining, Vorn declared, his voice resonating through the virtual chamber. We sacrificed generations of our finest ships and bravest warriors. The very fabric of this space is imprinted with the energy of our efforts. The doctrine of proximity. Benevolence is not a claim of ownership. It is a simple, elegant acknowledgement of this fact. The settlers on Viridia benefit from a peace they did not earn. The gratitude tithe is how they participate in the maintenance of that peace. The seals of the quorum seem to shimmer with interest. Vorn's argument was powerful. It appealed to a sense of order, of cosmic balance. In a galaxy full of chaos, the idea of a debt owed for peace was a comforting one. Rostova could feel the tide of opinion turning against her before she had even spoken. Thorn shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The Cathar were framing the debate perfectly. The arbiter's chimes signaled it was Rostova's turn. She took a breath, letting the silence settle. Commander Rostova, you may present your counter-argument. Rostova did not rise. She simply looked at Vorn's image. The Terran mandate does not dispute the principle of gratitude, Prelate. It is a noble concept. The admission hung in the air, a surprise to everyone, including Vorn. We dispute the accounting. A slight frown creased Vorn's chitinous brow. The accounting is a matter of our internal records. It is flawless. Then you will have no objection to making those records public, Rostova stated. It was not a question. For this inquiry to be just, the quorum must understand the precise nature of the debt you claim is owed. We request a full, unredacted ledger of the costs incurred during your pacification of this sector. Every ship lost, every munition expended, every life sacrificed. Put a number on your benevolence, Prelate Vorn. Show the galaxy the price of peace. It was a demand for the universe's oldest receipt. The challenge was audacious. It shifted the burden of proof entirely onto the Cathar. Vorn hesitated for a fraction of a second, but his pride left him no choice. To refuse would be to admit his claims had no foundation. As you wish, Commander, he said, a dangerous new glint in his multifaceted eyes. Be prepared to be humbled by the scale of our sacrifice. He signaled to his aides. A colossal stream of data began to flow into the inquiry's shared space. It was a data bomb, an avalanche of information designed to overwhelm and intimidate. Petabytes of information began to resolve into a vast, shimmering ledger, that filled the virtual chamber. It listed ship serial numbers from forgotten epochs, casualty reports written in ancient Cathar script, logistical manifests for campaigns fought before humanity had discovered fire. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. It was the financial history of a war fought against monsters, and it was aimed directly at Rostova's head. The quorum's seals pulsed with a soft, impressed light. The Cathar had not only met the challenge, they had exceeded it. The ledger was a monument to their historical narrative, seemingly unassailable. Thorn looked at Rostova, his expression tight with concern. They had asked for the receipts, and the Cathar had provided a library. Rostova remained calm. Her eyes were fixed on the impossible mountain of data. This was the moment she had been waiting for. This was the weapon the Cathar had so graciously handed her. She turned her head slightly, her voice a near whisper meant only for her ship. "Magister, you have the ledger. Begin the audit." In the heart of the arbitrage, processors began to blaze with silent, cold fire. Magister descended into the Cathar's mountain of data, not as a reader, but as a predator. The public inquiry paused, the virtual chamber filled with the silent, overwhelming presence of the Cathar's historical ledger. The members of the quorum were examining sections of the data, their initial awe slowly giving way to a grudging acceptance of the Cathar's position. The sheer volume was a form of proof in itself. Who would fabricate history on such a scale? Prelate Vorn was the picture of smug satisfaction. He had answered the humans' challenge so completely, so overwhelmingly, that any further resistance would look petty. He had turned their demand for transparency into a demonstration of his people's immense historical burden. He believed the argument was already won. The rest was merely a formality. On the bridge of the arbitrage, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Eris Thorn was reviewing the top-level summaries of the Cathar ledger, his face grim. "Ava, this is airtight. The documentation is cross-referenced. The chronologies are consistent. The energy expenditure calculations match accepted astrophysical models. It's the most comprehensive historical archive I've ever seen. We can't challenge its authenticity." "We aren't challenging its authenticity, Iraha," Rostova replied, her voice steady. Her gaze was distant, focused on an internal link with Magister. "We are challenging its integrity." The devil was not in the details, but in the math. A soft chime indicated that Magister had completed its initial pass. The AI's synthesized voice filled the bridge, calm and precise. "Commander, I have identified an anomaly. The Cathar ledger does not merely record historical costs. It compounds them." Rostova's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The Cathar have calculated the initial cost of their 5,000-year-old campaign. They have then applied a rate of appreciation to that cost, compounded annually for 5 millennia. The rate is consistent with their own internal models of investment return. A significant portion of the debt they claim is not for resources expended. It is for the opportunity cost of what those resources could have become had they been invested instead." Thorn's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Interest. They're charging interest on a war they fought 50 centuries ago. That's not a debt. That's a financial fantasy. It is more than that." Magister continued. "The compounding model they have used is not a standard economic formula. It is a proprietary algorithm that contains an exponential growth variable tied to the subsequent economic output of the sector. The more a new species like yours produces, the faster the ancient debt grows. It is designed to be unpayable. It is a mathematical trap." Rostova felt a surge of cold fury, but her expression remained a mask of calm. This was it, the flaw in the perfect fortress. The Cathar were not just demanding gratitude. They were monetizing history itself, turning the past into a perpetual engine of subjugation. They had presented a bill for a war, but the bill was for the ghost of money, for coins that were never minted, and for wealth that was never created. A debt of gratitude had become a predatory loan. In the corridor of law, Rostova signaled to the arbiter. The chime sounded, recalling the quorum's attention. Prelate Vorn. She began, her voice resonating with a new sharp authority. Your ledger is indeed a monumental work of history. We are in awe of its detail. Vorn inclined his head, accepting the compliment. The truth is often monumental, Commander. It is, which is why we must examine it closely. Rostova continued. She gestured, and a new display materialized beside the Cathar's massive ledger. It was a simple, elegant graph generated by Magister. It showed 2 lines. One, a modest flat line, represented the actual calculated cost of the ancient Cathar campaign. The second line, which soared upwards at a dizzying exponential curve, represented the total debt being claimed. The vast space between the 2 lines was shaded in a stark, accusatory red. Your ledger contains 2 things, Prelate Rostova explained, her voice cutting through the silence. The first is the cost of your actions. The second is the projected profit you believe you could have made over the last 5,000 years. You are not asking for gratitude for a service rendered. You are demanding payment for an investment you never made. You have presented the galaxy with a bill for phantom capital. A murmur rippled through the quorum. Seals flickered as delegates conferred in their private chambers. Vorn's serene expression finally cracked. His multifaceted eyes narrowed into angry slits. He had not expected the humans to have the processing power to audit his data so quickly, nor the audacity to question its core financial principles. Our accounting methods are our own, he snapped, his voice losing its silken edge. They are the basis of our economic strength. It is not for an upstart species to question the mathematics of its elders. We are not questioning your mathematics, Rostova countered instantly. In fact, we are so impressed by them, we have decided to adopt them. The statement landed with the force of a physical blow. Vorn froze. Thorn stared at Rostova, a slow dawning realization on his face. This was not just a refutation. This was a reversal. This was the turn. A calculation of justice was about to begin. Magister Rostova commanded, her voice ringing with cold clarity. You will now apply the Cathar's own proprietary compounding algorithm to a new set of data. The base value will be the total resources, labor, and economic potential extracted from the Viridian colony since the imposition of the gratitude tithe. You will project the opportunity cost of that stolen wealth. You will calculate the damages not just of what was taken, but of what Viridia could have become. Apply the Cathar's interest rate. Compound it by the second. Show us the price of their gratitude. She turned her gaze back to the stunned Prelate Vorn. We accept your premise, Prelate. Debts must be paid. Let us calculate the true debt here using your own flawless, monumental accounting. Let us see what the people of Viridia are owed. The inquiry chamber fell into a profound silence. The Cathar's own weapon, their predatory mathematics, had been turned back on them. The massive historical ledger they had presented as a show of strength now looked like an admission of guilt, the blueprint for their crime. Magister began its work. A new ledger began to form in the virtual space, a mirror image of the Cathar's, but this one glowed with the fierce, righteous light of a debt being called in. The numbers started small, but they began to climb faster and faster, a torrent of compounded justice aimed directly at the heart of the Cathar dominion. The air on the arbitrage bridge crackled. The game had changed. This was no longer about defense. It was about reckoning. The public inquiry was in recess, a pause demanded by the arbiter to allow the quorum to process the sheer audacity of the human counter-gambit. In the corridor of law, two ledgers now hung in the virtual space. One was the Cathars, an ancient sprawling monument to their self-proclaimed sacrifice. The other was human nascent and growing with terrifying speed. It was Magister's mirror calculation, a ledger of damages built using the Cathar's own predatory formula. Numbers flickered and climbed, each tick representing a stolen hour of labor. A liter of water diverted, a medical supply requisitioned from Viridia, all compounded over time. Prelate Vorn and his delegation had vanished from the chamber, their connection abruptly severed. It was a sign of panic. For centuries, their legal doctrine had been a one-way street, a tool for extraction. They had never conceived that someone would not only reject it, but seize it and turn it against them. The beautiful, complex cage of words they had built was now a trap closing on its architect. Kenji Tanaka let out a low whistle from the tactical station. "Commander, I'm reading a significant energy surge from the Gilded Hand. They're powering their primary drive. They might run." "Let them," Rostova said without turning. "The inquiry is a matter of public record now. Flight is an admission of guilt." "Where is their fleet stationed?" "The bulk of their armada is 2 sectors away, enforcing a tithe on the Gresh," Kenji reported. "The Gilded Hand is their only capital ship in this immediate vicinity. Their empire was a mile wide and an inch deep. They rule by fear of overwhelming legal and economic force, not actual military presence," Rostova mused. "They can't afford to fight on 2 fronts, especially if one is a battle of economics." She turned to Eris Thorn. The legal counsel was staring at the climbing numbers of Magister's ledger, a look of profound awe on his face. "Eva, the figures," he stammered. "By their own formula, the damages they owe Viridia will eclipse their entire annual gross product within 3 hours. Within a day, it will exceed the total calculated value of their home system." "That is the nature of exponential growth," Aris Rostova said calmly. "It is a wildfire. They believed they were the only ones who could light it." This was the first tangible cost of Rostova's strategy. She had escalated the conflict from a simple dispute over a tithe into a system-scale economic war. If the Cathar chose to retaliate militarily, the arbitrage was alone and outgunned. She was betting everything on the power of public opinion and the binding authority of the accord. It was a victory earned not with cannons but with consequences. A private channel chimed. It was from one of the quorum members, the delegate from the Arcturian Assembly, a species known for their rigid adherence to logic and fairness. The face of the Arcturian appeared on Rostova's screen, a being of flowing geometric light. "Commander Rostova," it stated, its voice a series of synthesized tones. "Your argument is compelling. The Assembly has always viewed Cathar doctrine with suspicion. You have provided the first quantifiable proof of its predatory nature. We are recalculating our trade agreements with the Dominion as we speak." Another channel opened, then another. The Gresh Directorate. The Orani Weavers Collective, a species the Cathar had already subjugated. They had been watching in silence, but now they saw a path to their own liberation. Rostova's gambit had not just defended Viridia. It had shattered the illusion of Cathar invincibility. It had given the oppressed a new language to fight back the language of their oppressors. A chain reaction of justice had begun across the stars. Magister's voice cut through the incoming hails. "Commander Prelate Vorn is requesting a private audience. He is not broadcasting from the Gilded Hand. He is using a secured channel from a location within the Viridian system, but not on his ship." Rostova's eyebrows rose. He abandoned his flagship. A logical move if he anticipated a mutiny, or its seizure under accord law, Magister noted. His personal authority is his primary asset. He is preserving it. Patch him through to my ready room, Rostova ordered. Aris Kenji, you're with me. The three of them entered the small Spartan room behind the command deck. The main screen lit up with Vorn's image. The change in him was dramatic. The serene arrogance was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. He was no longer in his opulent command throne, but in what looked like a small shuttlecraft, the lighting stark and unflattering. The mask had come off. This is an outrage, human Vorn snarled, dispensing with all pleasantries. A perversion of our sacred traditions. You have twisted our accounting into a weapon of slander. I have done nothing but hold up a mirror, Prelate Rostova replied, her voice level. The reflection you see is your own creation. The numbers on that ledger are generated by your own algorithm. Are you now saying your traditions are fraudulent? Vorn's mouth parts worked, but no sound came out. She had him pinned. He could not denounce the formula without invalidating every tithe his people had ever collected, effectively bankrupting his entire empire and triggering revolts on a dozen subject worlds. He could not accept it without owing a debt so vast it would crush his own civilization. He had been perfectly, flawlessly trapped. This was the essence of mirror justice. What do you want? Vorn finally spat the question, an admission of defeat. First, Rostova said, holding up a finger, you will appear before the inquiry and publicly renounce the doctrine of proximity, benevolence nullifying all debts claimed under its authority. Not just for Viridia, but for all species. It is to be struck from all legal records. She held up a second finger. Second, you will release the Gresh, the Pathali, and the Orani weavers from their vassalage. All tithes will cease immediately. Their sovereignty will be fully restored. She held up a third. Third, there will be reparations. Not the impossible sum my ship is currently calculating, which would be an injustice of its own, but a real tangible price. You will transfer the title of the Gilded Hand and its full cargo of Viridian resources to the colony's government. They will have their property returned, along with the means to defend it in the future. Vorn stared at her, his multifaceted eyes burning with a hatred that was almost pure enough to be a physical force. The terms were devastating, but they were also a lifeline. She was not demanding the full ruinous measure of the debt. She was offering a way out that preserved his civilization even as it shattered its empire. She was showing a measure of mercy he himself would never have offered. This is unacceptable, he hissed, but his voice lacked conviction. It is non-negotiable, Rostova stated. Just like your tithe. You have 1 hour to accept, or I will let my ship's calculation continue. The quorum is watching, Prelate. They are watching a new ledger being written, one that will be remembered for a very, very long time. Choose which history you want to be a part of. She cut the connection. The ready room was silent. Kenji looked at her, his expression unreadable. You're letting him off easy. The full debt would make us monsters, Rostova finished for him. It would make us no better than him. We don't win by destroying them. We win by making them live by their own rules and then showing them the meaning of clemency. We win by setting a new precedent. She looked at the chronometer. The hour had begun. It would be the longest hour of Prelate Vorn's life. On Viridia, the news had begun to spread. People gathered in public squares, their faces illuminated by the glow of news screens, watching the silent climbing numbers of the two ledgers. They saw the Cathar's claim ancient and vast, and they saw the human counterclaim new and righteous growing with the fury of a newborn star. For the first time in years, the air was not filled with the taste of dust and desperation. It was filled with the electric, unfamiliar scent of hope. They were no longer just victims. They were plaintiffs in the largest lawsuit the galaxy had ever seen. The hour passed in silence. Every minute stretched into an eternity. Rostova waited on her command bridge, a statue of calm. She had made her move. The entire confrontation, the fate of worlds, now rested on the pride of one Cathar prelate. She knew that true victory wouldn't be the moment he capitulated, but the moment the new precedent was locked into the public galactic ledger, visible for all to see, a permanent firewall against this kind of predatory justice. The cost had been the risk of war, the lives of her crew, and the unleashing of a dangerous new form of legal warfare. But the prize was the freedom of millions, and the reaffirmation of a principle: justice is not a commodity to be bought and sold. Then the chime from the arbiter. Prelate Vorn had returned to the corridor of law. His image was small and diminished. The arrogance was gone, leaving behind only the husk of a broken authority. He looked at Rostova and then at the silent, watching seals of the quorum. He cleared his throat and began to speak. His voice was a dry rasp, the sound of an empire turning to dust. Prelate Vorn's voice was the sound of a dynasty cracking. On behalf of the Cathar Dominion, formally acknowledge the judgment of this quorum. Each word was an agony, a piece of his civilization's core philosophy being publicly renounced. The serene confidence that had defined him was gone, replaced by a brittle, hollow shell. He stood alone in the stark light of his shuttle, a monarch presiding over the dissolution of his own crown. The doctrine of proximity. Benevolence is rescinded. All obligations claimed under its authority are declared null and void, effective immediately. The seals of the quorum pulsed with a unified, brilliant light. It was the visual equivalent of a gavel striking a verdict accepted and ratified across 100 systems. In the virtual chamber, Magister's mirror ledger, the towering calculation of damages halted its climb. Its final impossible number froze in place, a monument to a debt that would now never be collected. It had served its purpose not as a bill, but as a weapon of pure, undeniable reason. The vassalage of the Gresh, the Pathali, and the Orani weavers is hereby terminated. Vorn continued, his voice growing weaker, the words of liberation tasting like poison on his tongue. Their sovereignty is restored. He looked directly at Rostova's image, his multifaceted eyes a vortex of defeat and cold, simmering hatred. The vessel Gilded Hand, its crew and its cargo are surrendered to the governing body of Viridia as reparations. He had recited the terms perfectly. He had chosen survival over annihilation. The Empire had fallen not to a fleet, but to a clause. The arbiter's harmonious chimes filled the corridor of law. This judgment is recorded. It is binding under the full authority of the Intersystem Accord. This public inquiry is concluded. The virtual chamber dissolved the seals of the quorum, winking out one by one, leaving the bridge of the arbitrage in a profound, ringing silence. Kenji Tanaka swiveled in his chair, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across his face. He actually did it. They folded. Eris Thorn leaned back, removing his spectacles and rubbing his eyes, the physical toll of the confrontation suddenly visible. He had no choice, Kenji. The alternative was to legitimize a debt that would have unmade his entire civilization. Eva gave him the only exit that wasn't a cliff. Rostova said nothing. She watched the tactical display where the icon of the Gilded Hand had changed its designation color from hostile red to neutral blue. It was a small, simple change on a screen, but it represented the liberation of 4 species and the end of an era of predatory expansion. The victory felt quiet. It was clean, precise, and yet she felt no elation. only the heavy weight of the new reality she had just created. She had not merely won a dispute. She had rewritten a fundamental law of galactic interaction. Such things always had consequences. A vignette of freedom written in light. On Viridia, the news cascaded through the settlements. The oppressive weight of the tithe, a burden that had shaped every birth, every harvest, every quiet moment of despair for 2 generations, simply evaporated. In the capital, crowds flooded the main plaza, their faces turned up to the sky, where the gilded hand hung no longer a symbol of oppression, but now a prize, a promise. A father lifted his young daughter onto his shoulders. "What is it?" she asked, pointing at the hulking golden ship. "What does it mean?" The father's voice was thick with emotion. "It means," he set his throat tight, "that tomorrow we get to keep all the bread we bake." Rostova authorized a secure channel to the Viridian Provisional Government, beginning the complex logistical process of transferring control of a Dominion flagship. Her officers were celebrating in quiet, relieved conversations around her. It was in that moment of unfolding resolution that Magister's voice, calm and devoid of emotion as ever, cut through the low murmur of the bridge. "Commander, I am detecting anomalous energy readings from the Cathar vessel. They are not consistent with systems shutdown or crew transfer protocols." Rostova was instantly alert, the brief moment of respite gone. "Explain." "Multiple hatches are being sealed. Internal energy shields are being raised. The main reactor is spooling up, not down, and I am intercepting a high-bandwidth internal communication. The command codes are not Vorn's. They belong to a sub-prelate named Krell." Thorne's head came up. "Krell. He's a known hardliner, a militarist. He argued against the Accord's ratification decades ago." On the main view screen, the gilded hand was no longer a neutral, drifting prize. A faint, angry red glow began to emanate from its weapon emplacements. It was subtle but unmistakable. They were not surrendering. They were preparing for battle. The crew was defying its own commander, its own government, its own public declaration. A broken promise was being reforged into a weapon. A raw, unfiltered audio channel suddenly broadcast from the Cathar ship, overriding all standard frequencies. The voice was harsh, guttural, filled with a furious energy that Vorn's had entirely lacked. "This is Warlord Krell of the Gilded Hand. Vorn the Renouncer is a traitor to the Dominion and the memory of our ancestors. His words are weakness, and they will not be honored." The voice was a roaring fire where Vorn's had been a dying ember. "The gratitude. Tithe is not a policy to be negotiated," Krell bellowed, his voice echoing across the system. "It is a law of nature. The strong provide peace and the weak provide payment. This is the true accounting. We will not surrender our heritage to the flawed mathematics of a soft-skinned infant species. Viridia will honor its debt, or it will be sterilized as a lesson to all who would forget their place." The hulking ship began to move its engines, flaring not to depart, but to reposition into a planetary bombardment trajectory. Kenji's hands flew over his console. "Commander, their main weapon systems are charging. They're targeting the planetary capital. They're going to fire." The celebration on Viridia was turning to panic. The symbol of their liberation was becoming their executioner. The hope that had bloomed only moments before was now curdling into stark terror. The triangle of conflict had changed. Rostova's morality demanded she protect these people. Magister's calculus now showed a 98.7% chance of catastrophic civilian casualties. And the antagonist's method was no longer a legal document. It was the raw, brutal simplicity of a particle cannon aimed at 3 million souls. The corridor of law had led to a dead end, and at the end was a firing squad. Commander Kenji said, his voice strained. The Arbitrage is not a warship. Our shields can't withstand a direct hit from their primary cannon. We can't stop them. Then we will not try, Rostova said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. The anger she had kept so carefully banked was now a pillar of cold, controlled fusion. This was the first plan-changing escalation. The law had failed. Krell had thrown the rulebook into a furnace. But Rostova knew there were other kinds of rules. Rules written not in statutes, but in the fundamental language of the universe: cause and effect, action and reaction. Aris. I need you to draft an immediate system-wide legal injunction, she ordered, her mind racing. Cite Accord Enforcement Statute 13.8. Violent rejection of a ratified inquiry judgment. It triggers immediate asset seizure and a declaration of legal non-existence for the offending party. Thorn was already typing, his face pale but his hands steady. They're charging their weapons, Eva. A legal filing won't stop a particle beam, no. Rostova agreed. Her eyes fixed on the menacing form of the Gilded Hand. But it will turn every ship, station, and network in the galaxy into a weapon against them. She turned to her AI. Magister, you are now the executor of that injunction. You have access to the public ledgers of every signatory to the Accord, every fuel depot, every trade hub, every navigation network. A new kind of light began to glow from Magister's column. It was not the serene blue and silver of contemplation, but a hard, brilliant white, the light of enforcement. Warlord Krell has rejected the law, Rostova declared to her bridge crew, her voice ringing with the force of a final judgment. He has declared himself and his crew outside the community of civilized beings. So we will grant his wish. As of this moment, for the rest of the galaxy, the Gilded Hand and its crew do not exist. She was about to unplug an entire warship from reality. The bridge of the Arbitrage became the nerve center of an unprecedented act of legal warfare. It was a second mirror maneuver, but this time it was not reflecting a calculation. It was reflecting an entire civilization's interconnectedness back at an enemy who had declared themselves apart from it. Injunction filed and ratified by emergency quorum, Thorn announced, his voice tight. It's legal, it's binding. Magister, execute, Rostova commanded. The AI did not respond with words. It acted. Across 10,000 light-years, a silent, instantaneous cascade of information began. It was not an attack. It was an act of universal, automated ostracism. On the bridge of the Gilded Hand, Warlord Krell stood basking in the glow of his charging cannons, ready to deliver his brutal lesson. The first sign that something was wrong was when his targeting computer flickered and died. Report, Krell roared at his helm officer. Sir, I've lost targeting lock. The planetary government has vanished from my display. Then target the city manually. I can't. The primary targeting array is not responding to my commands. It says, invalid target. What the helm officer didn't know was that Magister had interfaced with the public navigation beacon network. For every ship and station in Accord space, the planet Viridia was still there. But for the unique transponder signature of the Gilded Hand, Viridia's coordinates had been erased. The ship's own automated systems designed to prevent firing on empty space could not compute a firing solution for a target that, according to the entire galactic network, was no longer there. They were aiming at a ghost, and their own guns knew it. Frustration turned to rage on Krell's face. Fine, forget the planet. Bring us about, target the human ship. Teach them the price of their legal games. The helmsman's hands moved over his controls, but the massive warship remained sluggish, its movements clumsy. Warlord, I am having trouble with propulsion. The nav computer is rejecting my course plotting. It claims our inertial dampeners are out of calibration. They weren't out of calibration. Magister had subtly altered the ship's public chronometer signal by a few microseconds. The ship's internal systems, constantly checking their time against the universal standard to perform the complex calculations for faster-than-light travel and maneuvering, were now in a state of perpetual error. They were trapped in a bubble of distorted time of their own ship's making, unable to trust their own instruments. Krell's fury was turning to a cold, creeping dread. His ship, the ultimate symbol of Cathar power, was refusing to obey him. It was like his own nervous system had turned against him. Engineering it. What is the status of our power core? The reply came back laced with panic. Warlord. The core is stable, but our request for refined helium-4 from the gas giant has been denied. The automated mining drones are not responding to our access codes. They're treating us as an unrecognized vessel. On the arbitrage, Kenji watched the data streams, his expression one of pure astonishment. They're locked out. Every automated system in this sector is rejecting their credentials. Fuel navigation, communication relays. It's all shutting them out. The injunction is working, Thorne murmured. Legal non-existence. They have no standing, no permissions. To the rest of the galaxy's infrastructure, they are nothing more than a rogue asteroid. The beauty of the maneuver was its passive nature. Rostova had not fired a single shot. She had not hacked their systems or violated a single law. She had simply used the existing agreed-upon framework of galactic society and turned it into an invisible, inescapable prison. The Cathar had used their laws to build a cage for others. Rostova had used the galaxy's laws to build a cage around them. A perfect enforcement built from rules, not ruin. Aboard the Gilded Hand, a new kind of terror was setting in. The ship was no longer a predator. It was a tomb. They were adrift in a sea of plenty they could not touch. They had power, but nowhere to go. They had weapons, but nothing to aim at. Their communications could broadcast, but no one would receive them, their signals automatically filtered as spam by every relay in the sector. They were shouting into a void that had been custom-made for them. The red glow of their weapon ports faded. The energy charge dissipated unused. The will to fight was being bled away, replaced by the crushing absolute weight of their sudden and total isolation. They had wanted to be a law unto themselves, and the galaxy had simply said, "Fine, be by yourselves." Rostova watched the Cathar warship drift impotent and silent. She had won. Again. And again the victory was quiet, bloodless, and profound. She had met a threat of ultimate violence, not with greater violence, but with a more perfect application of the system her enemy had sworn to defy. She had proven that the law was not just a collection of words, but a tangible force, an ecosystem that could protect itself by simply shunning that which sought to burn it down. But the cost was becoming clearer now. She had established a terrifyingly powerful precedent. The ability to declare a ship or a fleet, or perhaps even a world legally non-existent. It was a tool of perfect order, but in the wrong hands it could be a tool of perfect tyranny. A second tangible cost of her victory was the burden of that knowledge and the fear of what others might one day do with the weapon she had just unveiled. The power to erase was a dangerous thing to teach the galaxy. Commander Magister's voice broke the silence. "I am detecting multiple shuttle launches from the Gilded Hand. The crews are abandoning ship. They are broadcasting surrender signals on open frequencies. The mutiny was not one of violence, but of despair. The crew had chosen to exist again. Warlord Krell was now a captain with no ship, a warlord with no war. His rebellion had lasted less than an hour, defeated by a barrage of rejected permissions and failed logins. His particle cannons had been silenced by the galactic equivalent of a changed password. Rostova watched the small escape pods drift away from the dark, silent bulk of the warship. It was over. The law had been defied, and the law had answered. Now came the final accounting. The aftermath was a quiet, meticulous process of legal reconstruction. Krell and his mutinous officers were taken into custody by Accord peacekeepers, their legal non-existence rescinded just long enough for them to be charged with piracy and insurrection. The Gilded Hand, now crewed by a Viridian militia and engineers from the arbitrage, was slowly and carefully guided into a stable orbit around the colony it had threatened. It was no longer a weapon, but a salvage operation, a symbol of a fallen empire and a rising hope. On the bridge of the arbitrage, Rostova stood with Eris Thorn watching the transfer of command on the main view screen. The Viridian leader, a woman whose face was etched with the hardship of a lifetime under the tithe, was formally accepting the ship's title from a Terran mandate official. There were no grand speeches, only the quiet, formal exchange of data slates. It was an act of profound historical significance conducted with the mundane efficiency of a cargo transfer. "It's a dangerous precedent," Eva Thorne said softly, echoing her own thoughts. "The sanction mirror. The power to excise a dissenter from the network of galactic civilization. It could be abused." "Every law can be abused," Aris Rostova replied, her eyes not leaving the screen. "The difference is that this one isn't a weapon of conquest. It's a weapon of quarantine. It doesn't kill. It isolates. It doesn't destroy. It simply stops. There's a morality in that. We didn't answer their violence with more violence. We answered it with the complete absence of everything they needed to continue." Her arc was complete. The cold anger that had fueled her had given way to a form of principled reckoning. She had not sought to punish the Cathar, but to teach them, to hold a mirror up to their methods and force them to see the monstrous reflection, and then to hold a mirror up to their violence and show them only emptiness. It was a victory of profound restraint, a triumph of the system over the fist. A lesson written in silence and empty fuel tanks. Magister's light column shimmered. "Commander, the final element of the inquiry's judgment is being ratified. A new amendment to the Accord is being logged. It is being designated the Rostova precedent." On Rostova's personal console, a text window opened displaying the entry as it was being etched into the master public ledger of the Intersystem Accord. The sensory anchor of the moment was the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the ship's inertial dampeners, the faint scent of sterilized, recycled air, and the cool, smooth feel of the command chair's armrest beneath her hand. The glow of the screen reflected in her tired eyes. The text was simple, elegant, and permanent. Accord Amendment 74.3. The Rostova Precedent, Section A. The weaponization of historical debt, or the imposition of multi-generational extra-jurisdictional obligations, is hereby declared an act of systemic aggression and is outlawed. Section B. Parties found in violent rejection of a ratified inquiry judgment shall be subject to full network sanction and a temporary revocation of legal standing pending review. The system was learning. It was evolving. She had not just saved a world. She had given the law a new set of teeth and a new, stronger shield. Kenji approached, offering a data slate. "Commander, a message from the Irani Weavers Collective, and the Gresh Directorate, and the Pathali Republic. They say, thank you." He paused. "They are also forming a new defensive and economic pact. They're citing your methods as their founding principle: justice by numbers, defense by networks. Rostova took the slate, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. Victory was not an endpoint. It was the beginning of a new, more complex set of responsibilities. She had wanted to untangle a knot of injustice. Instead, she had rewoven a significant portion of the galactic tapestry. The universe was watching humanity now, not as upstarts, but as architects. She looked out at the view screen at the silent golden bulk of the surrendered Cathar warship. It hung in the black, a testament to a battle won without a single shot. Her work here was done. The cost had been high, a risk of total annihilation, and the unleashing of a legal weapon of immense power. But the prize was real. It was the quiet hum of a colony getting back to work, the silent blinking of a new law on a public ledger, the simple, incalculable value of a future that was no longer for sale. The bridge lights seemed to dim, focusing all attention on the master ledger entry on her screen. A single word beneath the new precedent blinked from pending to confirmed. The sound was a soft electronic click that echoed in the silence of the bridge, a sound heard across 1,000 worlds, the final lock turning in a new door of history. The law is not a sword. It is not a shield. It is a mirror and it is a ledger. It reflects what you are and it remembers what you have done. It does not forgive. It does not forget. It simply finally and inexorably counts. The accounting is now closed.